Well, good morning, good morning. We are back. Sorry we missed last week, but we are here with another Tech Tuesday. Michael and Israel from and
Got some extra sound there, don't we?
I got some extra sound because I'm watching myself. I'm listening to myself, watching myself. All right, sorry, movie reference there. So welcome. If you've got questions, please drop them in the comments. We will try to do the best we can. I've got a couple that I pulled that I think are actually pretty decent, including a picture. Pictures are always good. David Gibson, hello, hi. Um, why did we miss last week? You were goofing off with the family, right? Down to the
Yes,
beach.
yes, was beaching it up. Well,
Um,
technically, there was no beach. Well, we could see the beach, but we were in a place that was more like inlet, and then the beach was on the other side. So we actually went to the Gulf without actually going and setting our foot on the beach. But they have a lot of pools,
pools
you
are good.
so,
Well, cool.
and I'm good with that,
Yeah.
because I don't like the beach. So it actually worked out well for me.
So did you end up stumbling into anybody and helping fix their boat while you were down there?
No, no, it didn't really.
I think your last
Yeah,
trip down there, you ended up doing work at
yeah.
the
Dolphin Island.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's the name of the aquarium? Is it an aquarium? What the research center they've got
It's a
down there?
research, yeah, it's a research center. So they got a bunch of boats out there. Probably got 30 boats out there. And I saw somebody over there filling up some, helm with steering fluid. Is this lady, and she looked like she was struggling a little bit. So I jumped out there and helped her bleed it. So
Yeah. So hey, you were that was a field trip, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yesterday I went to get fitted for a tux, and their sewing machine was broken in the back. And if I didn't have somewhere I needed to be, I was going to go back there and fix their sewing machine for them. But just kind of how it works
just
for
can't
me.
help yourself.
I can't help it. Can't help it.
All right.
I see
Well,
something broken, I got to try to fix it.
well. Hey, that's a good thing you're in the job you're in.
That's it.
So, all right, guys. I'm not seeing any questions popping in, so I'm gonna bring up a couple here. I don't know. There's a whole lot to talk about for those of y'all that are in the local area fishing tournament. Um, the it's the 6th of November. We're
Yes.
doing a tournament as a fundraiser for Jamie Collette's family. He's one of the sales folks here that just passed away from COVID. So we're getting more details out on that for sure, but we don't have a whole lot else that I'm aware of going on. Frog Fest was fun, entertaining, talking about frog fishing. I hope everybody had a good weekend. Um, all right, let's jump in, David. Well, that's a huge.
Stressed her out there, didn't you?
Let's see if I can I grab it. We can still answer
There
it.
you go.
There we go. All right, man. We're just gonna do big print today. This is for the Seeing Impaired show. Are the new four-stroke faster than the two strokes with the 250s?
Um, I wouldn't. I think they're probably going to be close to the same, because the only time you're going to find it much faster is going to be depending on what kind of boat you're going to be putting it on. And I will say this, that I've seen that some particular boats run faster with the Yamaha on them versus the Mercury, and then I've seen just the opposite.
Hmm.
Same horsepower. So I had a guy with a TR 196, and he had a Mercury on there, and it ran like 72, and he put a Yamaha show on there, and ended up running like 75 in the same boat. So it was 225, but and then I've seen people that had Yamahas on there, and then we put a Mercury on there, and they ended up running faster. So, and that, a lot of that has to do with the props and the loader units, so and gear ratios and stuff like that.
Yeah. So as I understand it, these days, because I've listened to Tony talk about the kind of the history of horsepower with outboard motors, and how and Tony is the owner here, father-in-law, and basically been in this business his whole life. But he explained that back in the day, they really had no standard in terms of defining the horsepower. So one 250 horse motor from one manufacturer may actually crank out almost like 300 horsepower, versus another one may only be down at 225. And they finally went and actually set a standard. So when you get a 250 horse motor, there's a plus or minus tolerance.
Yeah, and it's at the prop shaft now. And a lot of people were advertising their horsepower at the drive shaft, or at the crank itself. Right. Now it's at the prop shaft. So that's the standard. And the deviation is like they can't go over 10% or below 10% that number. So they could advertise they got a 225 and be 10% below that number and actually, be 205 horsepower. At the same time, they could be 25, almost 25 horsepower above that number and be at 225. It'd really be around 250. And a lot of times they use that number to cheat the EPA as far as to get their EPA numbers down.
Right.
So, and like Mercury, the Pro XS 250 in 2012 was probably closer to 275. Well, in 2013, they were developing this 4-stroke, but they were still wanting to get their EPA numbers. So they had to bleed that horsepower down closer to probably 260. And so between those 2 years, you had one motor that was really fast, and the other one was really slow. You lost 2 miles an hour. So.
Well, once I heard Tony explain that a couple of years ago, that every time I hear somebody ask that question, especially if you've got, if you're getting input from old timers, you've been around for a long time, that's a really loaded question.
But I will say that typically Yamaha and Mercury try to go towards the top of that 10%. They try to get close to that high 10% number. So if they can meet their EPA requirements.
So you may talk to somebody that's got a 95 2-stroke that says, oh man, this thing runs like it may be cranking out a lot more horsepower than it's necessarily advertised as. So you never know. There's a lot of factors, obviously, like you talked about, boat and all that kind of stuff too. Timmy Taylor, it's been a while.
Yeah.
You've been busy fishing.
That's right. Thanks for saying hello.
I appreciate it. Hello. All right. Well, let me jump in with one of my questions here. This is a long one. It's a 2000 VMAX OX66 150 on the ramp. Wasn't smoking. Trimmed up a bit. No low oil light. Then once it was trimmed all the way down, take off, it started smoking like a normal cold 2-stroke. Is this maybe excess oil running into the intake from the last run, or do I need to check oil system? He says the oil tank level has been steadily slow dropping after each lake trip. Seems to be working correctly.
Okay. Yeah.
Just paranoid. Want it to last a long time. No issues besides that. Runs great on the water. Recent fuel pumps, VST, and lower service.
Yeah. It's probably the older these systems get, that they actually have a system in place on the 2-strokes that redivert the extra gas and oil up into the top cylinders and kind of trickles back down.
Okay.
But the older they get, I think the more those chick valves let oil by, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You can file a plug out a little sooner. But on a 2-stroke, if you're not smoking, unless it's an Optimax shouldn't be smoking. But some of the older Mercuries and your older Yamahas, if you're not smelling that lovely 2-stroke burning smell, and a little puff of smoke coming out, then that's when I would be more concerned.
Gotcha.
But the older those motors get, the more they're going to smoke, the more they're going to leak out in places.
Right.
And I've had people. The Optimaxes are the worst about leaking oil everywhere. The pump itself, people, where's this coming from? It was coming from the pump. And they got a rubber seal around it that's integrated to the diaphragm that pumps that oil. And I changed one guy's out 3 times in 4 months and just kept oiling. He's like, he cussed me out the last time he left and says, some other expletives, and there's nothing you can do about it. But they like to seep oil out, you know.
Well,
And he was one of these guys that had a, you know, he had a shop and you could eat off the floor,
gotcha.
and like every like 3 weeks he'd get a drop of oil on the floor, and it was just the end of the world.
Nice.
But just so you know that they leak and they smoke, so that's
Well,
what we want.
sounds like some of the old Navy helicopters. They used to say, if it ain't leaking, it's already leaked out, and you probably shouldn't go flying in it.
That's it.
So,
There you go. I like it.
All right, David. All right. Does it hurt to flash a 2006 Mercury Optimax 150?
I don't think it'll do any good because if it was a 4-stroke, I would say you're liable to get some good horsepower out of it. Um, Good as in, you know, maybe you get 20, 25 horsepower out of a flash 4-stroke smaller motor like that. But the 2 strokes, the way they get their horsepower is a little bit different than 4 strokes. Okay, so there's little ports inside the cylinders,
Mm-hmm.
and the size of those ports and where they put the ports in those cylinders is what we call port timing. Okay, and so they made that same motor in like a 200.
Okay.
And those ports are going to be a little bit different place and a little bit bigger. But anytime you go up on the horsepower on those 2 strokes, depending on the block size, your horsepower is going to be put in a different place. Okay, so that the more horsepower you have, it's going to be at the top of the RPM range, which means it's going to hurt your low end. So coming out of the hole and stuff is going to be a lot harder. Have to get bigger blowout holes, and it's going to rev up. And then once you finally do get it to break over, then you'll probably speed up on top end.
Gotcha.
You know, but to just get timing horsepower, which is the only thing that you can get, is to advance the timing. It brings in a whole bunch of other issues like overheating, pre-detonation, and then in the summertime you'll have vapor lock.
Oof.
Okay, so I don't think it's worth getting 20 horsepower out of your engine,
right,
to have to deal with all that stuff and the potential to blow your engine up a lot sooner in its life. So unless you're pulling everything apart, changing the port timing, changing the tuner, and then changing the prop, and then getting it flashed, it's a waste of time.
Gotcha.
In my opinion.
So would you say if you really want to get a little bit more out, you know, maybe playing with props? Or
Yeah,
something like that?
if you want to get 2 mile an hour out of it, 2 more, because that's probably, if the way it sits, if you got 20 more horsepower, you may get a mile an hour or 2 out of it at best. And you can send your prop off to Croxton's or Lanier or something like that, get it blueprinted and balanced, and probably pick those 2 miles an hour up. As long as you're not a shallow water fisherman that likes to dredge up into the creek. You know, if you're that guy, then you're out of luck. Right. Either way, because you're just going to tear your prop up.
Okay. And of course, don't forget the balancing of the boat out. I mean, that might be something you could play with. Depending on how you get the weight distribution,
and jet plate. Sometimes jet plate helps, you know. But your biggest bang for the buck is going to be sending the prop that you currently have. Usually costs about $300 to get it blueprinted and balanced. And then if you wanted to do a jet plate, if you do a manual, it's around $350 plus installation. Or if you get a hydraulic, then you spend more money. You're gonna be, you're probably going to outdo yourself if you get hydraulic.
Then you're probably getting into you might as well start looking for another boat with a bigger motor. Yeah. Or repower if that made sense. All right, considering two different pontoons, one with a 90 and the other with a 115, how much better is one versus the other gas mileage wise?
Gas mileage, I would say not a big difference, I don't think. Matter of fact, I tested. Let me just. I normally don't get on my phone, but I've got some data for you right here that may help you in this.
Well, while you look that up, I'll give you kind of my standard thing that I point out in from a sales standpoint. And if you're talking about buying new, one thing that I would say from the amount of used boats that we sell, the difference in money between a 90 and a 115, that 115 on the used market when you go to resell that boat, not hard to get your money back out of. Everybody's looking for a pontoon with a 115 on it. the smaller and smaller you go in the horsepower, the harder and harder it is. And so, depending obviously on the way the market is and all that, you run a pretty good chance of pretty easily getting your money back out. And I've never heard anybody say, I wish I got a smaller motor on my boat. I don't know, maybe you have.
I've actually had that happen.
Have you?
A few times. The guy said, "This thing's crazy. I need a smaller motor." All
Um,
right, so here's some data.
all right,
Okay,
data.
this is two different props. Okay, this is aluminum versus stainless, 90 and 115. Okay, so we put a aluminum on there first. Let's see, actually it's the opposite. This was a stainless first. The stainless ran with a 90, ran 29 miles an hour at 5,800 RPMs.
Okay.
Okay, and then no, this was a stainless. I'm sorry, the stainless prop, 29 miles an hour at 5,800 RPMs on a 90, and then it ran 31 miles an hour at 6,000 RPMs with a 115. So you got 200 RPMs and 2 more miles an hour out of it. Okay, and the same thing. I mean, it's almost the exact same with the aluminum, except each number was a mile an hour lower. So you had the 90 got 28 miles an hour at 5,800 RPMs, and the 115 got 6,000 RPMs at 30 miles an hour. So either way, you're not getting there's not a lot of huge difference in it.
Gotcha.
I don't know if a 90 costs $500 less. I don't know. You might know the numbers on that, but
Yeah, they're okay. So he's giving us a little
okay.
more
So you
info.
got different size boats.
Yeah, so it's different size boats and different year model. Um, that's also in terms of like choosing one of those, which I know you specifically asked fuel mileage.
Yeah.
I think the short answer to that is you're probably not gonna. Yeah, I mean negligible. It totally would depend on how you use it. If you want to go spend a whole bunch of time tubing, yeah, that 115 may end up doing a little bit better just because it doesn't have to work quite as hard as that 90, maybe. But I mean, you're really talking pretty negligible.
But I can tell you the engines are the same. It's the same block. There's pretty much on that engine. Most of the difference is going to be in the computer. So you're getting a little bit more time incurred at wide open throttle. Yeah. So if you're running 3,500 RPMs chilling, you probably won't see any difference. If you're running wide open, you'll see a little bit different mileage on the 115 because it's throwing out a little bit more horsepower.
Interesting. All right. Timmy Taylor says always go with a higher horsepower whenever you can. So my personal experience, my grandfather was he was a penny pincher. He bought himself a 24-foot tri-tune with a 90. Let's put a 90 on it. And this was early 2000s. It was a four-stroke four-stroke Honda. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to complain. My grandfather's paying all the bills. I have a lot of fun, but it wasn't very fast. I could have a great time tubing and all that kind of stuff. That was a pretty big boat with a pretty small motor, and very it'd be very unusual today. I mean, most of the 20-foot, 22-foot pontoons that we sell are going to go out the door with a 115.
Yeah, we try to do that. We did it the other way one time, and we ended up with a bunch of 90s.
Yeah.
But the biggest difference you're gonna see in that is if you buy a 23-foot that's rated for a 250, and you put a 150 on there, you're gonna actually probably spend more money on gas with the 150 on there.
Yeah.
Trying to do what that 250 or 300 was meant to do.
So, I don't know if that helps you at all, Eric. That's probably I would my gut would tell me it comes down to the price difference and the money that you're going to have and what kind of deal you can work on those two different boats. And keep in mind, some manufacturers call something a 21-foot boat, and the same length boat another manufacturer might call a 22-foot boat. They all tend to measure differently. Obviously, if you get the no kidding measurement of the boat length overall. But sometimes, a lot of times when you'll see is something referred to as a 20-foot boat is really 21 and a half foot. So that's another thing. If you're looking at two different brands and they're saying the one's a 20 foot and one's a 21 foot. They may actually both be 21, 21 and a half foot boat. So that's stuff to consider. Definitely look at the rating plate in terms of how many people can be carried. Different manufacturers will play those games, and particularly if you've got kids. I'm a big fan of get that number up as high as possible, because when they pull you over to check your boat over and you've got a weight rating on there, they don't have a scale. They're counting heads, and your little 40-pound 4-year-old counts against your head count. So if you're gonna end up with a bunch, versus your weight. So if you're gonna have a bunch of kids on there and stuff like that, if you can get that 20-foot boat that'll hold 12, 14. It leaves you just more options down the road for usage. But
and another thing to look for is if it's got lifting struts on it.
Yep.
Lifting struts, and you'll get better gas mileage, and the boat typically runs a little faster too. So,
all right, Avalon.
And he's looking at Avalon and Bennington.
Nice.
You can also look at Crest.
Yep.
And look at Bentley, which is what we carry.
Right. And I think
good bang for the buck on both of those. And we actually have G3 as well.
I think we've
pontoons.
got. You'd have to look. We had a used pontoon. I think we may have another used pontoon sitting around. I think the one that we've got's a lot higher. We've got a high-end Crest, I think, that's still available. You're talking about a $70,000 boat, so that's probably a little bit more. I think it's got a 300 on it. So that one definitely will take more fuel miles. Yeah. But that one would definitely eat more fuel.
I've never killed anybody out on that.
I got you. All right.
Measuring the throttle cable.
Yeah, measuring the throttle cable.
How
do you measure the throttle cable?
They typically tell you to add a couple of feet, but this is kind of a dangerous, not dangerous, but it can be an annoying thing just to throw a number out there, because you don't know exactly how high sometimes the box is. Okay, and the good news is most of the time, if you want to go too long before you want to go too short, because there's usually enough room in the back to just kind of cheat and put a bow in it so it'll reach. What you don't want is to go try to grab the cable stretcher, because it doesn't work very well. Okay, I manually measure. If I'm going to put a cable in, I manually measure it. So, and the best way to do that is measure to the center. Measure where you're going to be putting it. First. And then go to the back of the boat and you measure to the edge of the motor, and then you measure to the motor, and then I usually add a foot to that, and that'll get you really close. So,
right.
And if you're not real confident in it, you can always add length to that number, and you should be okay. But you don't want to find yourself. You don't want to drive 100 miles to the closest place and get a cable that's smaller, because then you got to go back and trade it back in, and then you're mad at yourself. So,
all right, awesome. Well, let's finish up with one more that I think might be good, that I pulled, and then we'll be done, because that's been a long one. Thanks, guys, for some good questions. So maybe move from a ski boat to a bass boat this year. First outboard I've owned with Winter Cummins. Think about winterizing, but no clue. It's 2018 200 show, 4-stroke. Does all the water drain from the engine? Basically, what do you know about winterizing?
I mean, what I try to tell people is, if this is your last trip, I feel like next week we're going fishing. It's got 3/4 of a tank of gas. Go ahead and put a stabilizer in the gas. Put your little something that's oily in there, like some Marvin's Mystery Oil or something like that, and then go run that stuff out of there. Get as much out as you can, without getting stuck out on the water. And that way, the little bit that is left has got some stable in it. It's got a little oil in it, just to kind of preserve it. And then check the gear case. Take it somewhere and get the gear case. Check for water. I mean, that's the biggest thing. There's more that you can do, but if you're just wanting to get by until next year, 2 things you got to do is get that gas out of there, and then you need to make sure you don't have any water in your gear case, because that gear case, if you got some fishing line around the prop shaft and water got in there, if it gets cold enough, it's going to bust the housing. Okay. Now beyond that, I would say take it somewhere to get it winterized. Because they're going to coat the cylinders with some oil. They're going to make sure there's no water in the gear case. They're not going. Most places aren't going to pump all your gas out because there's nowhere to put it.
Right.
If you can go run it out before you take it there, that's your best bet. And if you don't want to put stabilizer in there, we'll figure out how much gas is in there and take a pretty good educated guess on how much stabilizer to put in there. I prefer it to be run before you bring it to us with stable in it. That way you're getting that stabilizer in the fuel system of the engine, because that's important. We can put stabilizer in it, but we can't sit there and idle it for 2 hours hoping that all that, because when you idle an engine, it's only going to use so much fuel. So you only get so much in the fuel system. But the fact that fuel system is closed off, as long as it's only sitting for 6 or 7 months, it should be okay. But if it's going to sit for 2 years, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in big trouble. But other than that, we look at everything. We make sure everything's nice and good, no water in any of the passages and stuff. Especially on the inboard. The outboard is not as not as bad. But you do want to get some oil on the real thick oil on the cylinder so they don't rust.
So for a guy coming from being a ski boat guy, like he's talking about inboard out drives,
he knows about having to have it really winterized.
Right. So I mean, realistically, it's far less of a concern.
Yeah, it's nowhere near as bad as if you have an inboard or an IO. The biggest thing is getting the gas taken care of, and the only place that you really have to worry about water being in is the lower unit. There's other places in the engine, like there's some coolers on those engines. If they get sand in them and that water gets stuck in there, which is hard for us to figure that out. If it's not peeing, if the telltale hole's not working, and your water pressure gauge, you're not overheating, but your water pressure gauge is not working, then you probably got some stopped up sand in there, which means there's water in those coolers, and they will bust.
Gotcha.
But they're going to bust out mostly, which means you have to replace the plate, which, a couple $100 a piece is not terrible, but it's better. The block usually doesn't crack.
So probably more consistently, you got particularly the bass boat guys that will run their boats year round.
Yeah, they typically do. So, but I've seen them. I did fish for a month, and they got down to 22 degrees, and they went to take off, and it goes, ugh, and they think the motor locked up, but it was a lower unit because the guts were hanging out the side of it from freezing.
Well, ain't cheap. All right, guys. Well, David, I appreciate the thanks, and it's fun. I enjoyed doing this, and we will hopefully be back next week again as we draw nearer and nearer to winter.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, if you got more questions, drop them in there. Oh, what, you want to do one more from Ontario?
You can do two things, Todd. You can fog it. When I fog them, if I've got a port on the intake manifolds, a lot of times I've got like the little rubber plug. I'll run the motor and I'll pull those off. I'll squirt fogging oil in there, and then let it run for a second and cut it off real quick. Okay, but if you don't have that convenience, then you'll have to pull the spark plugs out, and then you'll squirt about an ounce of oil in there. And then put the spark plugs back in there, and you'll just turn the motor over. I wouldn't even crank it, like run it. I'd turn the motor over and let that stuff splash around in there, and coat the cylinders real good, and then put your spark plug wires back on, and be done with it. And then when you go to crank it, it'll smoke a little bit, and then hopefully it'll burn that oil off the plugs. If not, then you'll change the plugs.
And
I always encourage people, if they're going to change their plugs, do it at the beginning of the season.
You definitely should probably be more concerned about water and residual water in that motor than we worry about it down here in Alabama. So I think it's my mind goes more. I mean, right now, like you never quite know when we're really going to get a first freeze. Although I think Halloween we're getting pretty close.
Usually Halloween is usually the day it gets the cold.
But we got plenty of folks, and the way our season goes is we'll have a freeze, and then we'll have another 82-degree day. before Christmas, and a lot of folks will keep running their boats. But I know up there in Ontario, that's not quite the way your weather works. But
You think they still have milk in a bag?
I don't know.
I heard it in the song one time.
All right, guys, we're gonna go grab some lunch. Thank y'all so much. We will talk to y'all again next.